Thank you. Good afternoon. I call to order the May 2nd Committee of the Whole for Planning and Public Works. Online, we have Council Members Kritzer and Kahn, and in chambers, we have Council President Forsyth, Council Member Fields, Council Member Carson, and myself, Presiding Officer, Council Member Stewart. We have 3 items on our agenda today, the first of which is the Economic Development Plan Scope of Work, and we are joined by Deputy Director Seraphy Allen and Economic Development Manager Philly Marsh. So I'll hand it over to the two of you. Thanks.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Council. Thank you for having us. This afternoon, we are going to be introducing the Economic Development Plan launch and guiding principles for our consultant search. This item will come back in July after a competitive RFP process with a recommended consultant for Council's approval. Today is really just more of a touch base, making sure we're headed in the right direction. And I will turn it over to Philly Marsh.
Thank you, Seraphy, and good afternoon, Council. I'm very excited to be here to talk about the launch of the Economic Development Plan. The City of Redmond's Economic Development Program is maturing and would benefit from a strategic planning process and deliverable to align and leverage opportunities for economic growth. The purpose of the plan is to provide clarity on Redmond's economic vision and the required programming necessary to achieve the vision and opportunities in Redmond. The planning process and final deliverable will align the city's economic efforts through the organization into a holistic body of work that reflects Redmond's vision, unique opportunities, and current best practices. With Redmond 2050 planning and process, this is perfect timing to align comp plan level policies with implementation strategies and actions to accelerate economic development efforts. This process and project will value broad and intentional research and stakeholder engagement to deliver a 5-year strategic work plan for Redmond's economic development program. The project will include referencing recommendations and work items from city's various plans and strategies, continued stakeholder engagement, and conducting an evaluation of Redmond's economic development opportunities. The final deliverable will be a chapter-based economic development plan with program strategies that will be approved by City Council. In its creation, the Economic Development Plan will be in alignment with existing Redmond and regional policies and reflective of the current realities of the market and ecosystem in which the city is operating. We want this plan to be really reflective of Redmond. Redmond's a unique city and a unique region and a unique state and a unique time of recovery, so it really needs to be intentional and custom-made for Redmond. We want the plan to enhance equitable economic development practices, use a process that draws on both quantitative and qualitative data to inform strategies. So really look at what the data says and then also what our stakeholders think and feel about Redmond and economic development efforts. It will use a process that prioritizes broad stakeholder outreach and also engages internal city departments and programs that contribute to Redmond's economic environment or business engagement. Again, this will set a vision and mission for economic development in Redmond that can be communicated with a variety of audiences. We want this 5-year implementation action plan to align, organize, prioritize, and sequence economic development efforts in a series of program chapters with short-term and medium-term strategies. Yet we do want longer-term strategies beyond that 5-year implementation period to be included for future consideration or opportunity. Initial strategic areas will include business attraction and competitiveness, business retention and expansion, entrepreneurship and small business support, an industry cluster analysis and development, as well as enhancing livability and leveraging partners. We hope this will also define key performance metrics for Redmond's economic development program that can be reported to Council on agreed upon cadence. And then again, upon completion and review of this plan, we'd like this to be formally adopted by Redmond City Council. So with that, I open it up for questions, comments, and then again, direction to bring back a recommended consultant after the competitive search and selection process has occurred.
Thank you so much, Ms. Marsh, for that awesome introduction to what I know is going to be a popular topic. There's been a lot of eagerness for this topic. So I'll just let the record reflect that we've been joined in chambers by Councilmember Kritzer and Councilmember Anderson. Reminder to council, we're going to see the contract in July, hopefully. But are there questions or direction at this point that you might like to offer up? Council President Forsyth.
Thank you. I'm interested, I know this is funded by ARPA money, and you'd mentioned recovery as a component, but it is a 5-year plan. So can you briefly let us know how small businesses will be incorporated into this work, and how those businesses that are still struggling, like we heard from the hoteliers, how that will be implemented, since this is a longer-term plan, but those folks are struggling currently?
Yes, it is funded by ARPA funding, so we really see recovery with a close bridge to growth. So we need to recover, but then we don't want to stop after we've recovered. We want to grow, and so that's how this plan will be framed. Small businesses and entrepreneurship is a key component and will be a dedicated chapter of how specifically to help those businesses. Also, through our data analysis, we'll look at different industries and see where there's strength in certain business industries that are categorized as small businesses, and what specific tactics might be supportive to them in that recovery and growth.
And then just making sure that we're including our micro businesses in that as well.
Correct, yeah, those under 5 employees, for
Thank
sure.
you.
Thank you. Councilmember Anderson.
A similar vein to Councilmember Forsyth's question, regarding small businesses, I would like to see additional work on disadvantaged business enterprises as well. If that's not, I didn't see that highlighted in the memo, but specifically what we will be doing to encourage DBEs, WBEs, and MBEs. So thank you.
Great suggestion.
We're going around the table. Councilmember Fields.
You mean we're going this way?
We appear to be.
So how many respondents do you think you're going to get?
That's a good question. Multiple neighboring jurisdictions are also going through a strategic planning process. The city of Issaquah is a little ahead of us, and they received, I believe, it was more than I anticipated, but I believe it was 8 responses that they received. Yep. And those were from both local as well as regional and national consultants.
And the RFP, I know you said this, but it's already completed, it's ready to go, you've done that?
It has not been released yet. We wanted to do this touch point first,
Right.
but we hope to release it in the next week.
But the RFP is close.
Correct.
Right. So I know this is probably a little bit too abstract, but let's just pretend I'm a college student coming back to Redmond, or somebody who wants to move here, or somebody who's sort of shopping around for a place to live or put a business or something. Somebody not in the mainstream Redmond community already. What kind of information, when this thing is complete, would I be able to see about the future of Redmond? What do you think it will show from a sort of that broad perspective of this is the kind of city you can expect that will emerge from, as you put it, what did you say, an active plan or something? I can't remember the words. Actualized plan? What was it?
Action plan.
Action plan. There you go. So when this action plan is done, we will change. The city will be different. What kinds of information at that executive summary level would somebody who's interested in knowing and making choices about living here, what do you think they would learn?
Well, to answer that question, I think this one of the things I mentioned is we want this to be a communication tool for a variety of audiences and really be able to communicate that vision and mission for economic development. So while it won't focus completely on what kind of the livability is a component of economic development, so you will see that reflected in this plan. But I would also say it would be a communication tool for someone looking to work in Redmond, what industries we're focusing on, how we're supporting entrepreneurship and small businesses, and that telling that story would then hopefully entice that individual or those people to come and consider Redmond as a place to live and work.
That's great, because that was actually my follow-up question. I read an article the other day that 50% of the workforce needs to be retrained to meet the future of whatever that workforce is going to look like, which is sort of a mammoth shift. And I'm just curious, and it sounds like we are going to capture at least an idea of what will emerge in Redmond as a base of businesses. Appreciate that.
Correct. Yeah, through the data analysis, some things we're hoping to get illustrated is, what are our industry clusters, what's growing the fastest and the most concentrated, what's our economic diversity and occupational diversity, employment growth and employment growth by industry, as well as that small business and entrepreneurship, which can be measured by patent activity, self-employment and the incomes with those, as well as new business starts.
Great, thank you. With those responses, I now share Councilmember Stewart's excitement about this, so thank you.
Good.
I have full confidence that you had it all along. Councilmember Carson.
Thank you. So I wanted to ask you about the workforce. And so there's and I don't even know who said it, but I think it's a very good saying, is that the perfect customer is the one you already have. Well, the perfect employer is one that you already have and grows in your community. And so one of the things I would love to make sure we're doing is, in the analysis that is provided by the consultant, what are the weaknesses we have in terms of a business? So the sectors that we, obviously there's some pretty obvious ones, but maybe some other one, games and software and obviously space come to mind. But what would keep a business from continuing to grow their business here in Redmond versus having to go somewhere else to find the talent? And how do we fill those gaps talent-wise? What kind of concrete steps can we take to make it a more well-rounded kind of employment ecosystem, I guess? So that's what I'd love to see.
And we will be looking at that from a data perspective to show that, and then what a city in particular may be able to do and what Redmond might have the capacity to do in a very large regional ecosystem of workforce development.
Right. Obviously, Redmond can do certain aspects of it, but what, like you said, regional, so are there gaps regionally? And I'm sure there are. It's just, so I would love for those to be identified so that, okay, the new employment growth can go to Redmond because we have filled those gaps and we've made that a specific target. So great, thank you.
Yeah.
Really sorry, I'll just add as a reminder that we're expecting about 35,000 jobs by 2050 as well, so we will be needing to think about where that will go.
And with that 35,000, we pitch it to you, Councilmember. 25,000 by 2050. All right, Councilmember Kritzer.
Great comments from my fellow council members and echo a lot of these ideas. And I think to some of the point of my fellow council members, I'm definitely interested with this study, very excited about it, and for us to be able to come up with a 5-year plan, since I think a lot of the work that we've done in the past has really been in collaboration with One Redmond, but it's great from the city's perspective. I love the piece about outlining what are the roles we want to have within the city, and then what are some of the external partnerships, and getting some of that clarity on how we move forward. So just more comment that I'm looking forward to that. And I think one thing that I brought up to One Redmond before, but I think might sit better in the city strategic plan is getting at what some of my fellow council members were saying around, especially as we grow in our urban centers, thinking about Overlake, thinking about downtown, and then the new Marymore Design District, is really thinking about what would it look like? What kinds of businesses would we want to attract to those kind of core areas to make it super livable? Like, You know, does each one of those include what percentage of kind of things for nightlife or going out, things, other types of, you know, whether it's entertainment or food or, you know, having a local bookstore, or what are those types of things? So we can go out and kind of attract those types of businesses and create these very vibrant centers and figure out what we're missing there. And some of them, like downtown, we already have a lot of things there, but then figure out what we're missing in places like Overlake. We definitely have some businesses there, but I think as we're developing, especially along the 152nd corridor, just to intentionally plan around that, I think in terms of economic development will be really interesting. So mostly just jumping on top of the really thoughtful comments others have shared already in terms of this. And then the other thought that I had on this is that as we're going to be growing, one area I think if we want to be able to, that I've been hearing in terms of an impediment for being able to retain workforce for a lot of businesses is access to childcare. So I think it'd be interesting to have that as part of this strategy, is just thinking, one, how do we attract, in terms of businesses, more childcare institutions and have that be a piece of it, but then also what does it look like engaging with employers? Because I think we think about things like housing for workforce or transportation for workforce, but just making sure that we're thinking about how we work with them on issues like childcare. So,
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll wrap up with my thoughts just very quickly, since my colleagues did such a great job. I wrote down complete neighborhoods, urban centers, and equity and inclusion. I think the conversations that we've been having and were most recently referenced really fit nicely with the Planning Commission's conversation around complete neighborhoods and what businesses it takes to make those complete neighborhoods and those third places for community to gather. And with equity and inclusion, one of my favorite, I love the intentionality to be in alignment with the other plans that are already in place in the city. One of my favorite things about the Housing Action Plan is that it puts equity as the North Star, and I really invite you to be bold when you move forward with choosing a consulting partner who can help us do that. All right, thank you so much for joining us. Councilmember Fields.
Yeah, some of the comments made me think of this. Will this RFP and the work include risk or barriers to success elements? Things like, you know, that we have to make sure. Sometimes cities build things and then they go, oops. Will we be looking at those risk factors?
We will, yeah. So any strategy, there will kind of be an analysis of what it would take in any, I don't want to say consequences, but any
Barriers to
implications
success.
or barriers there might
Okay,
be
great.
to that. Yeah.
Thanks.
Great. Well, thank you. Councilmember Kritzer.
Apologies, I just had one last thing, just in thinking about the kind of overlay that we would want to see on this. I also think that environmental sustainability, as we think about these plans, is really a critical one to overlay in. Like, for example, as we think about what types of industries and businesses we want to attract, you know, are there any of that environmental impact, and just generally a triple bottom line approach to how we do this economic development planning. Thanks.
All right. Lots of enthusiasm, as I predicted, on this one. Thank you so much, Ms. March. Thank you, Director Allen. We're going to move on to item number 2 today, which is the approval of the interagency agreement for the 23-24 waste reduction and recycling grant with King County. Here today to work on this item with us, we have Director Aaron Burt from Public Works, Deputy Director Anne Marie Marshall Doty, Aaron Moldover, Environmental Programs Manager, and Stacy R., Solid Waste Program Manager.
But you only get one of us today, and it's me.
And Aaron's going to be in charge. Thanks so much.
All right, yeah. Good afternoon, council members. I'm Aaron Moldver, Environmental Programs Manager in Public Works, and I'm happy to be here today to provide an overview to you all on 2 grants that we're eligible to receive from King County. The first is the King County Waste Reduction and Recycling Grant. It's a biennial grant of about $156,000 from King County Solid Waste Division for the calendar years of 23 and 24. The scope of work that King County has approved for us in this grant include 3 Ridwell pickups per year that include a promotional mailing for each of the pickups. And then during each pickup, Redmond residents will be eligible to have styrofoam, plastic bags, and plastic film picked up for recycling from their doorstep at no charge, just similar to the program that we've been running for the last year and a half. And then the January pickup will also include pickup of holiday lights. Another task under this scope of work will be creating and hosting sustainable living classes with topics including recycling, composting, and how to prevent food waste. We've also partnered with the library over the past year to host the in-person events, which has been great as we've moved out of COVID. And then we'll be using the grant funding to also create short videos about sustainable living practices for use on Redmond social media channels and posting to the city's recycling video library, which now has almost 30 videos, which is really good. It's actually been a great way to reduce the amount of questions we personally get as staff from residents because they can go find the answer on our website. The second grant is the King County Local Hazardous Waste Management Grant. It's also a biennial grant. It's about $52,000 from the King County Department of Natural Resources, Parks, Water, and Land Resources Division for the 23-24 biennium. The activities funded under this grant focus on household hazardous waste awareness and prevention. The scope of work for this grant include annually creating a mailer to increase awareness around which household products are hazardous and to reduce barriers to preparing and disposing of them safely at home. Also, we'll be hosting safer household choices classes with topics about safer cleaning and proper disposal of household hazardous waste. And then again, creating short videos about safer household choices for use on the Redmond social media channels and also the city's recycling video library. So with that, we're asking to place these grants on the May 16th consent agenda for approval. And I'm open to any questions you might have.
Thank you so much. And again, they're both for consideration for consent on May 16th, but let's do questions one at a time. So for item number 2, are there any questions from the council? Councilmember Anderson.
Mr. Moldberg, thank you so much. I think one of the greatest things about this program is the energy about waste or trash. It depends on how you want to think about it. I have a curiosity, and with the comprehensive background information you've provided and all the data on our website now, how are we handling the idea of a lot more people, a lot more jobs coming into the town, but also maintaining or reducing the generation of waste in the first place?
Yeah, that's always a struggle, and the area we target the most is our multifamily developments because that's where we're getting that dense growth. And so, we're working in the background right now on some code updates related to multifamily properties on space requirements, right, for new developments. So they're actually thinking ahead and planning enough space for the solid waste recycling and compost within those facilities. So that'll help promote and improve recycling at those facilities when we continue to see this growth. But yeah, that's the biggest challenge right now. We have a lot of great questions. We have a very engaged resident population, and so I think as far as our overall diversion rate from residential, it's always high. It's in the 60% range, but the multifamily is the one that's hard to target that we keep focusing on.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that feedback.
Thank you. Council President Forsyth.
Thank you. Following up on that question, I'm interested in learning more about, if you can address how we have a lot of we have some gated communities and we have a lot of closed apartment buildings. How does the Ridwell program work with the gated communities and those apartment buildings to ensure that those folks still have that opportunity when it's not somewhere that you could normally get to that front door? And I was reading under the simple actions. I didn't see anything about requiring composting in those multifamilies and in those HOAs that claim they've tried it and say it doesn't work. I would love to see in one of those code updates where we make it a requirement. That's my personal take on that. And I know the action that Kirkland has taken with the bin tagging, I found that as a interesting solution to that problem that the HOAs claim as a reason why they can't do the composting. So lots, if you can address.
I can touch on a couple of them. We'll start with the Ridwell. It is up to the property manager to choose to elect to do that, to have that. We had some resistance at a few locations initially. They've come around and allowed residents to participate. So we kind of work, it's a one-off thing. When we hear that, we work with the property manager to see if there's a way that we can get a solution so that residents can participate. With regard to requiring composting, Our commercial organics program has been super successful because it's not something that we've required. It's something that people want to do and they opt into. And because of that, there's very little contamination. And we have one of the cleanest routes in the state, really, as far as contamination goes. So the new composting law that went into effect this past year, it's going to ratchet up in a few years to require composting for businesses over a certain size. So it'll start making businesses that otherwise didn't have to compost, and we might start seeing additional contamination around that. We will get in front of it with more outreach with those businesses ahead of time to hopefully prevent that. And then what was your third question?
Preventing HOAs from keeping folks from composting.
Yeah, I haven't heard of any preventing. It's usually the residents have to get together and reach out to the city and then convince their, well, it is preventing, I guess, when you put it that way, convince their property manager to allow them to have composting on site. But again, I think we've gotten around a lot of that with most facilities. And then the new buildings, are a lot easier to work with because they are starting, even though we don't have code in place yet on requiring a certain amount of space, we are getting calls from architects, saying, hey, what do you require? I'm like, well, we don't require anything yet, but in a perfect world, we want you to accommodate this much space for this many units so that you can actually, fit all those services into that building and make it work right. And staging is another big issue too, right? What do we see when we drive through downtown Redmond? You see dumpsters on the street for too long and in the wrong place. So we're hoping to address that as well.
And I would also hope that we're looking to address those dumpsters not being in ADA pathways and right-of-ways. I know currently there are some spaces that it gets challenging to get a wheelchair through to our wonderful bike paths and wonderful trails. So,
yep. Fire lanes, all that stuff.
Yeah, great.
Sure.
Thanks for being on top of it.
We're trying.
Thank you. Are there other questions on this grant renewal? Councilmember Fields.
Thank you, and I also really appreciate the work that the city does in this topic. I'm going to ask something that I've been wondering about for some time. Is there any regional effort to work with businesses? I'm not going to name too many of them, but for example, Costco, Trader Joe's. I mean, I need a PhD to open up some of the stuff that I buy in those places. They're so overwrapped and there's so much material. Everything is just, triple thick, whatever. Yeah. Is there, and I don't know if the city of Redmond can't go this alone, but is there any effort being done to say, hey, consumer, maybe you should demand a little bit less packaging because it's really starting to make a mess of the planet? Is there anybody who's doing that?
Well, there's been 2 failed attempts at legislation over the past 2 years in the state. I think Councilmember Stewart is pretty up to speed on this. She went up to BC and toured their EPR program. It's called Extended Producer Responsibility, but in essence, it's kind of a cradle to grave, technique for managing packaging. So if I'm a packager and I'm making this box for you, I need to make sure that you, where it ends up in your local jurisdiction, can deal with it and that it is recyclable, with the current technology that's there, right? So that's failed a couple times. They keep refining it. I think it's going to pass soon, like next year, hopefully. And that will address, on the, wider scale even than the Costco's. I mean, all the way down to the 7-Elevens and anybody that has a package of whatever that they sell, Coca-Cola, like all that. It's going to be a universal thing. So.
No, I appreciate that, and I look forward to that day. Thank you.
Yep.
Other questions from the council? Councilmember Carson.
Thank you. So to kind of tag on to what Mr. Fields was talking about. So unfortunately, a lot of the reason behind some of the packaging is theft resistance, but it also makes it consumer resistant because getting into it, I mean, I've destroyed things in the process of trying to open the very package that it came in. And so I know exactly of what he speaks. And it's not, it seems like it's maybe, some parts of it are recyclable. And so I think we, as a society, have a ways to go on our packaging. But I think a lot of times it's making it difficult for people to open the package there and leave it without, because they often have RFID tags in the packaging so that it sets off the sensor. And so maybe it's a sign of our times that we're seeing the packaging more difficult to get into, and that's part of the reason, I think. But it is, I find it particularly annoying. And I think what even makes it worse is that you see Amazon and online retailers going to, no fuss packaging because they don't have to worry about it being stolen, except maybe at the doorstep when you don't know what it is. But so it makes it a lot better for online retailers, and which I'm not completely in favor of, because I'd like to still be able to go and, buy from a brick and mortar location and support my local businesses. But that's, I think, the rub between the two kinds of packaging. So.
Yeah, I can't speak to the security part of it, but the, recyclability is what we're looking at.
Yeah, Councilmember Kritzer, did you have a comment on the grant renewal?
Yeah, well, it's, not on the grant renewal, but on this topic quickly, I would say if Councilmember Stewart has any information that she got during her Vancouver tour, I think it would be interesting to have that shared with the council, just so we can all benefit from learning more about what other places that have adopted this, what it's looking like on the ground for them. So I don't know if you have any materials, but I was just looking in my email and I didn't see any follow-up materials after you'd gone on that, but it sounded like a really
Yeah,
cool
it was definitely
opportunity.
reported in the Ombuds report, and I'm happy to follow up with folks. I'm unfortunately going to miss the legislative session wrap-up that we're doing with Amy on the second study session of the month. But there is a very specific reason why the RAP Act has failed 2 years in a row. And so I hope that you all will ask about that when you have Brianna and Amy with you. Redmond showed up great at the legislature this year with so many other cities, and there's a lot of great city partners in it, but there's a very specific partnership that we will need to change before we can get it passed in Olympia next year. So that's a little bit outside the scope of this conversation, but yeah, please do ask about that with Amy and Brianna. Any other questions before we send this one to consent and move on to the next grant? Sounds like we're ready to go on this one. Thank you so much. Are there questions on item number 3 with the hazardous materials? Council President Forsyth.
Is this one that Aaron would be presenting as well?
I
He
did.
already did.
I presented them back to back there. So this is the household.
That's what I was missing when you said.
hazardous
Okay, yeah, so let me
waste
introduce it.
management.
That's a great call.
Sorry
Let me
about that.
introduce it. So item number 3 is the approval of the 23-24 Local Hazardous Waste Management Program Grant with King County Department of Natural Resources and Parks, Water and Land Resources Division, agreement number HW 1023.
Yeah, sorry, I bundled.
No worries. Any questions? You're actually getting thumbs up around the room, so I think we're good to go to send
All
this
right,
one to
I like
consent
that.
on the 16th as well. Thank you so much for being here, Aaron. We appreciate that.
Great. Thank you.
I do have a couple of items for the good of the order. This month, we'll get to celebrate Public Works Week, so we'll get a chance to thank everyone. There's some applause, if you can't hear it on the microphone, from Councilmember Anderson. And we have 2 of our council members who will be heading to the, correct me if I get this wrong, but the National Association of City Transportation Officials in a couple of weeks. So at our June committee meeting for this committee, we'll have a report out from Councilmember Fields and Councilmember Khan on their experience and what they learned. Thanks, everybody. We are adjourned.